Negativity is like darkness. So what is darkness? You look at darkness and you see that it's really nothing. It's the absence of something. You turn on the light and darkness goes. But sunlight, for instance, doesn't get rid of negativity. It gets rid of darkness, but not negativity. So what light can you turn on that removes negativity the way sunlight removes darkness? It's the light of pure consciousness, the self, the light of unity. Don't fight the darkness. Don't even worry about the darkness. Turn on the light and the darkness goes. Turn up that light of pure consciousness. Negativity goes. Now you say, that sounds so sweet. It sounds too sweet. But it's a real thing.
LoreFactsTV. Toby Fox as a creative wears his influences on his sleeve, and we're far from the first to point these out. But one that I've seen mentioned far less than any of the others is the work of the very creator whose quote we introduced the video with, David Lynch. Lynch is a world-renowned creator whose body of work captures beauty and darkness, the most grotesque depictions of pure evil, and the most genuine portrayals of human goodness. All of his work possesses an incredibly unique, strange, and uncanny quality that paradoxically makes his scenes feel closer to reality than the work of possibly any other director. This is to such a degree that critics have coined the term Lynchian just to describe this indescribable vibe that his work, and now work inspired by it, gives off. Through his film and television, he endeavored to show the world that even when immersed in the deepest darkness, all one needs to do is turn on the light. And we think it's pretty clear to see how that shines through into Deltarune. I'm Bob, and welcome back to LoreFactsTV. As the guy on the channel who had the least experience with Deltarune, we set out to have me play the game all the way through and document the experience, with it being an interesting look into how someone with no Deltarune fandom exposure would perceive the game, and what conclusions they'd draw. That video will be out soon, but during the course of making it, I couldn't help but notice parallels to one of my favorite franchises of all time, David Lynch's Twin Peaks. As the chapters progressed, these similarities seemed to me to be far more intentional, and by the end I felt I just had to make a video on Deltarune's possible inspirations, as I feel there's a hell of a lot we can learn. While I was trying to piece the game together myself, a lot of what I already knew about Twin Peaks actually helped me to predict things that could happen in the plot fairly accurately. And so I'm pretty convinced that by taking a comprehensive look at these similarities, we can make some educated guesses about what may happen in the future of Deltarune. As Gerson said, stories are just reinterpretations of the same basic ideas. This doesn't give the new stories any lesser value, and they often bring something totally new to the table. I don't think any of the Deltarune characters would say Dragon Blazers was just a rehash of Lord of the Hammer, nor do I think Alvin would say his father's books were a rehash just because they were based on the prophecy. Each of these reinterpretations always carries the author's own messages and experiences, while utilizing the common themes of these past works that they themselves hold dear. The small town, the mysterious stranger out to right wrongs, the sprawling conspiracy, the dark forces in the woods, and the lost girl who connects it all. These are all themes that Toby Fox is clearly aware of and himself has lovingly reinterpreted, and are therefore core to understanding Deltarune. Toby Fox himself has a very unique relationship with ideas, one that, in an interview, he likens to that held by David Lynch himself, who is essentially notorious for his musings on the concept of ideas. Twin Peaks' unparalleled level of identity and creativity allowed it to inspire many works, not only being incredibly influential in the US, but it also broke through into Japan, arguably more popular in Japan during much of its run. We'd be doing Toby Fox a real disservice if we tried to claim that Twin Peaks was his only inspiration, or that it was at the forefront of Deltarune. But as we were researching this video, we found something quite interesting. Many of the Japanese works that we know are explicit inspirations for Toby Fox and his games were not only developed during Twin Peaks' popularity surge in Japan, but were themselves, according to their creators, inspired directly by Twin Peaks. This means that not only is Deltarune directly inspired by Twin Peaks, but that the other properties that inspired Deltarune were themselves inspired by Twin Peaks. This video aims to highlight these connections, both in Twin Peaks and in the other games that Twin Peaks inspired that, in turn, also inspired Deltarune. If what Toby, through the character of Gerson, said about the reinterpretation of stories holds true, then we should not only be able to find these parallels, but actually be able to use them to understand a few possibilities of what might happen in the future of Deltarune, and how, possibly, the characters might just be able to change their fate. After all, as Gerson said, stories can be retold, they can be changed. That's what I believe. But to understand this corpus of stories, we have to start at the beginning, in the sleepy town of Twin Peaks.
Everybody knew she was in trouble, but we didn't do anything. All you good people. You want to know who killed Laura? You did! We all did.
Twin Peaks is a hauntingly beautiful crime drama that differed to most at the time. Rather than a small town being constantly rocked by the most heinous crimes imaginable and then going back to normal the next week, Twin Peaks followed one single crime, the murder of Laura Palmer, and the irreversible impact it had on the unusual denizens of Twin Peaks. Laura was David Lynch's archetypal woman in trouble, a girl who on the surface was the ideal of the American young woman, an A-plus student, an active member of the community, even the prom queen. But under the surface, a darkness threatened to corrupt her life and drag her down. Laura's death not only affects the citizens of a small town, because of the brutality of the crime and the loss of such an irreplaceable citizen, but because the investigation proves that seemingly unconnected citizens in this idealistic place were, in reality, all either complicit or involved. The story goes even deeper, musing on the nature of dreams and the darker yet darker forces of primordial evil that lurk in the woods of a town, but we can discuss those aspects later. Regardless, Twin Peaks is not a nihilistic story that aims to tell us we're all monsters. Quite the opposite. Through the arrival of Special Agent Dale Cooper, an upbeat, eccentric FBI detective with understanding of the forces on the periphery of our world, he proves that you need the deepest darkness in order for the brightest light to shine. Ultimately, Twin Peaks is a story about how a single event can change the world for the worse. But if a good man tries, even in the face of adversity, he may well just tip the balance for the better. It's nearly impossible to summarize Twin Peaks succinctly, but we will return to it very soon, so try and keep all of this in mind. We can't talk about anything related to Toby Fox's inspirations without first going into EARTHBOUND. The legendary second entry in the Mother series, EARTHBOUND is a game that is probably the most well-known of Toby's inspirations. His EARTHBOUND Halloween ROM hack not only served as one of his biggest entry points into game dev, but is even the source of Megalovania. From the beginning of the game in a small town, Ness must venture out, acquiring a band of unlikely allies with unique abilities, all of this to defeat a being of primordial evil. Ultimately, in EARTHBOUND, you defeat this entity not by fighting, but by praying, a clear inspiration for the act system. If we were to list off all the ways that EARTHBOUND's influence appears in Undertale and Deltarune, we'd be here for hours. And perhaps that can be a future video. But for now, we just want to highlight the specific elements that connect to the theme of this video, and through that, to Twin Peaks. People have been discussing the Mother series and Twin Peaks for years, but right out of the gate, creative director Shigesato Itoi has listed Twin Peaks as a specific inspiration for the series. From cute references like Mr. Saturn's Loving Coffee, just like Agent Cooper, to the Great Southern Hotel being a blatant parody of Twin Peaks' Great Northern, to Moonside and Magicant's references to the iconic Black Lodge. We could go on, but I'd highly recommend you just go and pick up EARTHBOUND yourself and see what was clearly such a big inspiration for Toby. When initially writing this video, we had intended this section to be a quickfire list of similar-sized sections, just briefly highlighting the games that inspired Deltarune. But after digging into The Legend of Zelda, Link's Awakening, and finding so much of value, we just couldn't face cutting any of it, so excuse us for this more verbose section. Link's Awakening is an unusual Zelda game in that it takes Link totally out of the usual setting of Hyrule, and instead takes place entirely upon a tropical island. The game itself is so beloved to Toby Fox that the vast majority of Chapter 3, and the Sword Route itself, is dedicated entirely to a Link's Awakening reference. From Link first washing up ashore on Koholint Island, he begins to meet a cast of unusual yet pleasant characters, including Marin, who acts a fair bit like Ralsei as our guide throughout the island, alongside a friendly owl. We learn that in order to escape, Link must awaken the Windfish, a sleeping being of godlike power, that has the capability to grant any wish. However, upon reaching the final section of the game, Link discovers that the entirety of Koholint is within the dream of the Windfish, and the owl is a manifestation of its subconscious, trying to guide Link to wake it and end the dream. This will free Link and allow him to continue on his quest, but at a terrible cost. The entirety of Koholint will cease to exist. It won't be destroyed, it won't be an apocalypse, it will simply just cease to be. From this point, the bosses in the game take a different stance, telling Link they only wish to stop him to preserve their own existence. The player, through the cipher of Link, is presented with a dilemma. Keep going for eternity in the dream, and allow Hyrule and its people to fall to chaos under the fist of Ganondorf, or end the dream. By this point at the end of the game, we may feel attached to the island's inhabitants, but how can it be right to stay there in perpetuity? Even if we don't care about the windfish's well-being, all the people Link is meant to protect will surely perish without him. The choice seems hard, but the windfish tells us. The nature of dreams is to end. It's incredibly pertinent to note here that during the same chapter, which contains the colossal Link's Awakening reference that is the Sword Root, we hear Ralsei speak about Darkeners not even being real. Surely more than a coincidence. Very soon, both us as players, and Chris as our cipher into Deltarune, may have to make a similar decision. What is especially interesting about this implication is the fate of Marin in the true Link's Awakening ending. During the game's events, Marin will tell Link that she wants to be a seagull, so that she can fly out all over the ocean and see the world outside Koholint. Later on, she tells Link that she made a wish on the windfish, but will not tell him what it is. It's a secret. These events are resolved in the true ending, when, after Link reappears in the real world, never again to see Koholint, he looks to the sky. He sees a seagull flying off into the distance, and we see Marin's face in the sky. This seems to imply that maybe, just maybe, she got her wish after all. If Marin is a direct inspiration for Ralsei, this leaves some very heavy hanging implications about his ultimate fate and what hand we might have in it. Takeshi Tezuka, director of Link's Awakening, has said explicitly that Link's Awakening was inspired directly by Twin Peaks, both with its colorful cast of characters and its musing on the nature of dreams. Moreover, Mark Frost, the co-creator of Twin Peaks alongside David Lynch, actually went to Nintendo and gave ideas that would become Link's Awakening. The sheer reliance on dreams as a core theme is something essential to David Lynch's work, and at the center of Twin Peaks. It's no surprise then that, after the conversation with Mark Frost, Link's Awakening became a love letter to the series. With some Twin Peaks-inspired stories discussed, let's return to the source, that eerie and beautiful small town that changed television forever, and serves as the core of so many stories that came after. And just like with Deltarune, it all starts with one lost girl.
To introduce this story, let me just say it encompasses the all. It is a story of many, but it begins with one. Laura is the one.
Laura is the one. The many seemingly unconnected aspects of Twin Peaks, the themes, the townsfolk, the unnatural events, and the strange goings-on. Laura is the point at which all of these paths intersect, but who was she? When we enter Twin Peaks, within the first few minutes, we are met with Laura's body, cold and dead, washed up ashore on the lakeside, wrapped in plastic. Immediately, we see the reaction of the townspeople. Individuals with no familial link to Laura were distraught. There wasn't a single person in town who wasn't moved by her death, because she had impacted so many lives. For many in Twin Peaks, however, it was a loss from which they would never recover, as if their very soul had been taken from them. There was another side to Laura, however. We learn as the series progresses that she could be violent, mocking, and always able to get her way. It wasn't as if this was another personality, but equally it wasn't her true self. This dark side was a corruption, something she hated, perhaps even a manifestation of that very self-hatred. Even in spite of this darkness within her, she still endeavored to protect her closest friends from it. And while we'll skim over the grim circumstances of her death at the moment, we gradually learn that a dark force had loomed over her life since she was young, not just in the sense of someone abusive, but a genuine, profound darkness. What initially appeared to be a standard case of a lost dead girl became something much larger. Here, we feel we should bring up December. Whilst it's not stated outright, it's pretty safe to assume that Des is considered either missing or dead by the vast majority of the town, and it's clear a hole has been left in Hometown. Nothing is quite the same. Equally, while Des's disappearance, as we came to understand it in the story, was just that, a normal missing persons case. We now have justifiable reason to believe that, indeed, as with Laura, dark forces are at work. As we've alluded to, Twin Peaks has many entities that aren't quite human, and we can discuss them in depth later. But for now, we just need to know about Bob, the main antagonist of Twin Peaks. Bob is theorized by one of Cooper's colleagues to be the evil that men do, and that's about as succinct as you can get it. While Bob feeds on the pain and suffering of individuals, Laura was something else entirely to him. She was so strong that he couldn't easily feed on her, but should he be able to possess her, he would have access to a limitless supply of pain and suffering. In the film Fire Walk with Me, we see the final week in the life of Laura Palmer, and during the film's plot, we are introduced to something that quickly became essential in the mythos of Twin Peaks, the ring. With anything David Lynch, it's hard to pin down exactly what something does, and asking the man for an answer would always end up in somehow having less information than you started with. But we can say a few things for certain. This ring was incredibly dark in nature and related to the Black Lodge, the place where many of the mysterious entities in the show originate from. Within the movie, we see various attempts to try and get Laura to put on the ring, with Agent Cooper acting from the future, urging her not to do so. Ultimately, at the climax of the film, during her death, another entity, Mike, steps in and gives her the ring. By wearing the ring, Laura's soul is separated from her body, residing in the Black Lodge and forcing Bob to have to kill her instead of being able to possess her. By wearing the ring, Laura's life was ended, but perhaps she was saved from a worse fate. In the lodge, Laura, now free from the darkness that has haunted her life, witnesses an angel descend from above. The parallels here extend to both Des and Noelle. The archetype of Laura is obviously a very similar type of character to that of December. Not an evil girl, but one with a definite violent streak, but always willing to protect the one she loves. Her death or disappearance isn't a simple mistake or crime, but a deeply metaphysical event that affected the very nature of the world. Furthermore, however, the idea of the ring in Twin Peaks is eerily similar to that of the Thorn Ring, and in fact, this was one of the initial inspirations for this video. Much like in Twin Peaks, the exact function of the Thorn Ring is mysterious. However, it seemingly has a metaphysical connection to the player, and therefore, in some sense, Gaster and any other mysterious entities. In Twin Peaks, the ring is a weapon in a metaphysical power game between two entities from another world. In Deltarune, it would appear that the Thorn Ring could be serving a very similar purpose, given its effect on Noelle, especially if we consider the often cited fan theory that the Weird Route is some kind of alternate route to the prophecy. It feels appropriate here to discuss a major through line in Fire Walk with Me. As we've alluded to, Laura grapples with her darker half throughout the film, at one point specifically mentioning that even the angels wouldn't save her now. This is accompanied by the image of an angel disappearing in a painting. To her, this is the idea that she has lost any hope of redemption and is destined to bring great darkness to the world. However, at the end of the film, when her soul is within the Black Lodge, perhaps in a state of undeath, but safe from the abuses within her life, she sees a vision of an angel, seemingly confirming to her that she was not beyond saving after all. We have to talk about Des and Noelle here, and the wider prophecy of the Deltarune as well. We know that Noelle is continuously associated with angel imagery, being cast as the angel, wearing a white robe in the dark world, etc. Furthermore, in the Deltarune itself, we of course have the angel as an essential part. Perhaps then, it may be that Des's redemption for the horrors she has visited upon the world as the night will be in the form of Noelle. But if Des's disappearance is like Laura's, then can we expect someone like Agent Cooper to eventually help us retrieve her?
Kyle's character, the FBI agent Dale Cooper, I tried to base that character on David to some extent, so that a lot of his quirkiness and attention to detail, which are things that David has in great abundance, sort of came to the surface with that character.
With Twin Peaks, we witness how a single, horrific crime can rip the heart out of a small-town community. But with the heart gone, the autopsy follows, and we learn that even the smallest towns can harbor the grandest of conspiracies. Not only were the townspeople complicit in their respective lost girls fall into darkness, but many of them were explicitly involved with the very real dark forces that played as much of a hand. In Twin Peaks, we learn that the father of Laura's no-good football captain boyfriend, Bobby, was an airman, and involved in a government project based deep in the town's dark woods. Initially intended to monitor the skies for unusual signals, they very quickly turn their attention to those very same dark woods instead, searching for a way to harness the primordial forces of dark and light that dwelt within. But all is not lost. In the midst of this chaos in Twin Peaks, Agent Cooper arrives, a total stranger to everyone in the town. Surprisingly enough, though, the people become enamored with him. He sets to work investigating the goings-on with the total cooperation of the sheriff's department, all while having a whole other agenda. See, we learn much later on that Cooper himself is likely already privy to the information relating to the forces at play in the woods. During his time in Twin Peaks, he regularly saves the townspeople from yet more trouble, all through his uncanny powers of intuition. As the plot progresses and gets far more metaphysical, especially in the third series, we see Cooper ultimately manipulating far greater forces than any one man ought to, all for a singular goal: to put the world right and to save Laura Palmer. While Cooper appears to be successful in his enterprise, he ends up seemingly stranded in a new world, very similar on the surface, with people who look almost identical to those he remembers, but their personalities are something else entirely. At this point in the video, I'd like to make a crazy claim. In the story of Deltarune, we think the person playing the archetypal role of Agent Cooper, the mystery man from out of town who will be the key to saving everything, is Sam. Let's think about everything we know of our friendly skeleton for a second. In order for this to work, though, we need to make a quick assumption. Undertale is the end of Sans' story. So Sans arrives in hometown, seemingly with no real motivation, but very quickly ingratiates himself with the townspeople. When last we saw him, he was partying with Toriel, to the annoyance of not only Chris, but the entire fanbase. The very next event we know of on Sans' timeline is him ending up in the world of Undertale, with a superior understanding of the notion of timelines and the other metaphysical forces that control that world, and with no way to ever get back home. We currently have part of the beginning and the end of Sans' story, but we're missing his origin and the middle. Well, if we follow the archetype set by Agent Cooper, we may be able to make an educated guess. As we stated, Sans has an incredible amount of knowledge with regards to the forces at the very core of the world. Ideas of saving and loading, even the ability to dodge. Nothing special in Deltarune, but unheard of in Undertale. He arrives in hometown for seemingly no reason, and becomes an annoyance in Chris and the player's life for equally no reason. For such an iconic character, this doesn't quite make sense, especially when Deltarune ought to be the basis of Sans' motivations in Undertale. Consider this possibility. Sans has been sent to investigate anomalies that have been present in hometown since the disappearance of December. Not anomalies in time, like he's investigating in Undertale, but in space. Dark fountains. Okay, that could work, but who sent him? Well, enter another character from Twin Peaks, Cooper's mentor, UNDERTALE. We mentioned that the US Air Force's project in Twin Peaks shifted from monitoring the sky above to monitoring the ancient sacred sites of the woods around the town. This shift was a result of the research of FBI agent DREEMURR, who grew obsessed with these supreme negative forces and the ability to harness this darkness for great gain. This drove him mad, and eventually he tried to kill his protege, none other than Agent Cooper. Years later, Cooper would appear in the town as a new arrival, seemingly there to investigate the murder of a lost girl, all while being acutely aware of the forces lurking in the dark corners of his town. This knowledge was thanks to the work of his troubled mentor turned archenemy, DREEMURR. If we follow this mentor-student archetype, then it possibly gives Sans his origin. He would be some sort of pupil to an individual doing government-sanctioned research in the darkest parts of a town. Does hometown have somewhere that fits the mold here? Well, you already know the answer. In order to gain access to the shelter, one needs a code from the town's priest, its chief of police, and its mayor. Anything that was going on there was surely done, at least at first, with the approval of the great and good of hometown, just like the research in Twin Peaks. In Twin Peaks, it's Cooper's mentor who initially conducted this clandestine research, seeking to unlock dark forces within the woods of the town. In Deltarune, deep within the shelter, we hear none other than W.D. Gaster. If this was the first and only connection between the two, this would be exceptionally tenuous. But it isn't. If you want a comprehensive list, you can check out our recent video, but one we actually forgot to include there is perhaps the most conclusive link between the two. Sans' weapon, the Gaster Blaster. Additionally, in Entry 17, as we mentioned in that video, Gaster isn't monologuing, but asking two individuals what they think of the experiment's result. Many believe these two to be Sans and Papyrus. We know from Undertale that Sans is extremely moral. Despite intending to be an impartial judge, he can't stomach the player if they've chosen to wipe out everyone in the underground and chooses to fight us, in spite of knowing he will never win. It's easy to believe then that he would wish to prevent the insane experiments of W.D. Gaster, especially if he was aware that they could lead to the end of the world, or perhaps the eternal slumber of the innocents within the town. When examined through this lens, it suddenly becomes clear why Sans is so eager to befriend Toriel. Not only would he prevent her from getting trapped within another dark world, if indeed he's aware, but it gives him an ideal opportunity to take a leaf out of Agent Cooper's book and do some investigating in the house of someone inherently connected to the goings-on in the bunker, Chris DREEMURR. So then, we have a small town with clandestine goings-on that very likely contributed to the death of one of their most beloved citizens. When all seems darkest, a stranger appears, apparently with no connection to the town, and begins investigating the strange goings-on. Unbeknownst to everyone involved, this individual has ties deep in their past to the research that resulted in this death, and, moreover, to the insane leader of said research. But what of the beings that lurk within the dark? What role do they have to play, and how do they relate to the light? Twin Peaks and Deltarune share an outwardly dualistic worldview: light and dark, good and evil, choice and consequence. However, one is with the other. If we carefully observe, we discover that these stories aren't just following simple dualism. In fact, they're far closer to the idea of a unified whole. Let's take a step back for a moment. In Twin Peaks, we have the idea of the Black Lodge, a place outside our world inhabited by all manner of strange, sometimes malevolent, often dangerous entities who feed on pain and suffering. These beings take on vaguely human forms and are capable of possessing individuals in our world. The Black Lodge is often associated with evil and negativity, but in actuality is closer to imperfection. When explaining the Native American legends of his people that detailed the lodges, Deputy Hawk of the Twin Peaks Sheriff's Department explains that all souls, on their journey after death, must pass through the Black Lodge. They will face many trials therein, but most of all, they must face their shadow self. This is on the path to achieving perfection. Only when they have confronted their darker half and achieved completeness will they be able to transcend to the White Lodge, the place of perfection and serenity. As an aside, while we discuss the Black Lodge, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention some striking visuals in Deltarune that seem to us to be intentional references to the Black Lodge and its influence. If we look at the rug within the Holiday's home, it bears a striking similarity to the iconic floor of the lodge. Furthermore, when the knight uses its wind attack on the Fun Gang, it carries this same pattern, now with a red overlay, perhaps like the lodge's equally iconic red curtains. Finally, during the sequences, again in the Holiday's home, where Chris is separated from us, we see an odd spotlight shining on Chris. This imagery is distinctly Twin Peaks and happens at several moments in the show when the lodge's entities are influencing the real world. As we can see here, in Lynch's cosmology, the Black Lodge isn't some hell to be avoided, but an essential step on the journey of all souls. But what of the beings that dwell within? The beings in the Black Lodge are ephemeral by their very nature, and Twin Peaks isn't one to give straight answers, but there are a few things we know for sure. Bob, the antagonist of the series, called the evil that men do, seemingly didn't always exist in a form as he does now. Men have, of course, always committed evil acts, but a catalyst was necessary, a sort of original sin, in order to conjure his being into existence. In the conception of Lynch, this darkest day for mankind was the Trinity nuclear test, the first ever detonation of an atomic bomb. In Season 3 of Twin Peaks, we see, at this very moment, a dark creature, vaguely in the shape of a woman, spawns Bob into existence, and we can assume that from then on he was present in the world. That female figure we see, while also never answered straight up, is assumed to be an entity referred to as Judy. Called an extreme negative force, Judy is never outright called evil, just negative. This here is key. Throughout Twin Peaks, we get a variety of clues as to the identity of Judy. Much like the mystery of the night, it seems like this otherworldly entity can't possibly be anything but a being of pure darkness, an extreme negative force. At least at first. As the plot progresses, however, and we pick up more clues, we learn that Cooper and his colleagues never once talk about defeating Judy as they do Bob, simply that they want to find Judy. In the end, when Cooper is sent to the place in the timeline where he ought to find Judy, he instead meets with Laura, 25 years in the past, on the night that she died, and endeavors to save her life. He tells her they are going home and leads her to the White Lodge. However, immediately before she can be brought to that place of perfection, we hear the noise that has been built up to be associated with Judy, a scratching, and suddenly, Laura is nowhere to be found. We see explicitly that Cooper is successful in removing Laura's death as an event in the timeline, and the history of the town moves on without that deep scar upon it. But Laura is now missing instead. Moreover, Cooper must finally travel to a new world, separate from the one we are used to, where Laura, working at a Judy's diner, now resides under a new identity, with seemingly no connection to the name of Laura Palmer. We have to wonder, is this reminiscent of what may occur in Deltarune? If Sans has a role to play in the plot, specifically in the endeavor to try and save December, will he end up having to reside in a new world with no way home as his penance? The connection is eerie to say the least. Regardless, as with Laura and Judy, Des and the Knight, what we are given is the idea that rather than light and dark being forces locked in eternal opposition, they are instead more like a yin and yang. ideally in balance, with each containing the potential for the other. If this holds true, then the deepest darkness contains the potential for the brightest light. This is the ideal with Laura, we think. She is capable of such profound negativity through the influence of Judy, but this enables her to choose to act with the most profound goodness. Will Des make the same decision? Another entity of the Black Lodge we'd be remiss if we didn't mention was Mike. Initially the malevolent partner of Bob, they killed together, feeding on the pain and suffering they gathered. Eventually, though, Mike claims to have seen the face of God, likely an encounter with the beings of the White Lodge, which made him totally shift his purpose in the world. He cut his entire left arm off, marked by a tattoo of the devil, and from then on pursued one goal: stopping Bob. Interestingly, Mike's arm isn't necessarily the source of his evil. In fact, the arm, also known as the Man from Another Place, is perhaps the most iconic character in Twin Peaks outside of Cooper himself, and alongside Mike is a vital ally to solving the mystery of Laura Palmer. Throughout the show, and especially Season 3, Mike and the Arm regularly provide supernatural aid to Cooper, even saving his life several times. And though they aren't pure good, are clearly on the pathway to redemption. This archetype of a being who has lost his way but is inspired to help a force of true good in the world we can see pretty clearly with Sham. At first, totally jaded in the world, he progressively becomes more invested in our quest to prevent the roaring, even getting excited when we explain to him that we defeated the Knight and obtained a shadow crystal from it. We know from game data that eventually Sham will purify these crystals, swapping their shadow for light. And again, Mike uses the word purified, especially when referring to himself. Tenuous? Perhaps, but if you subscribe to the idea that Sham and Friend are, or perhaps were, one and the same, suddenly we get an idea far similar. It's not a one-to-one parallel, and we're not trying to suggest any of these are, but by having a piece of him that has been essentially severed, perhaps in penance or perhaps because it contained his darker half, Sham and Mike both fit the role of a secondary ally exceptionally well. Ultimately, Twin Peaks and Deltarune seek to espouse the same idea here, that the light from within, that is to say, the potential to do good, is more potent than even the deepest dark, but it may well need the bearer of this light to find themselves within that dark for it to have any effect.
We're like the dreamer, who dreams and then lives inside the dream. But who is the dreamer?
Events around us in dreams may not be real, and are influenced by the self, a reflection of the self. When you experience these dreams, there is only one inevitability: the dreamer must awaken. When you awake from a dream, even if none of the people you met, places you went, things you did are real, they still reflect on and through the self, through you. So in that sense, dreams are real in a way. Connect this to dark worlds and experiences in them. Susie is the greatest example. She's had a drastic character shift thanks to these dark worlds. Even if Ralsei, the Card Castle, or Tennis TV Time aren't real, the effect they had on Susie most definitely is. As we progress through Deltarune's chapters, it becomes abundantly clear that the nature of the Darkeners is not what we once assumed. As we delve further, Ralsei explains explicitly that Darkeners are inanimate objects given form by the Dark Worlds. More specifically, however, they're given form by the mental perception of the creator of a given dark fountain. In fact, we know this for certain. During Chapter 4, in an attempt to speak to Gerson again, Susie attempts to open another dark fountain. In reality, she simply wants to return back to the Dark Sanctuary, but instead we arrive in a realm that is similar on the surface, but in actual fact quite different. We encounter an organic, his description in the recruit menu telling us he is a philosopher who studies the ancient words. Their light-blocking mask is said to let them commune deeper with the truth of the dark. And indeed, he reveals one of the most pertinent pieces of information about the Dark Worlds to us, one that served as a key inspiration for this video. I am the philosopher. You sought to return the dream, but the lighting of the mind has changed. At best, you can only see another side. The lighting of the mind has changed. What an interesting phrase. We've just discussed the nature of light and dark, and how light requires darkness to shine brightly, both in Lynch's conception and in Deltarune's. But here, the philosopher is explaining how this process actually works. The light that allows one to begin perceiving shapes in the dark world is within their own mind. As a result, we can say for certain that a dark world's nature is determined not just by the physical objects within, but the mind of the fountain's creator. The philosopher likens this to a dream. But if that's the case, who is the dreamer? This question, alongside the notion of we live inside a dream, is core to Twin Peaks, not in the often used narrative cop-out sense of everything just being a dream, but in a deeper, more philosophical sense. Many people have often mused about the exact nature of the dark worlds, and this quote from the philosopher Organic. But David Lynch's own beliefs that he imparted into Twin Peaks explain it perfectly. Again, to refer to what Gerson said about stories, Lynch's beliefs weren't solely original, but were shaped by traditions from the East, particularly the Vedanta school of Hindu philosophy. Lynch was especially drawn to the tradition of Advaita Vedanta, non-dual Vedanta, and when you understand this, not only his work, but work inspired by him, really starts to open up. Essentially, in the conception of Advaita Vedanta, we may visualize the self, our own experience of the world, as separate to the whole universe, but in fact, the opposite holds true. In this tradition, the true nature of reality is that all things, human, animal, plant, sky, sea, and planet, are elements within the dream of Brahman. In effect, Brahman, a sort of sleeping god, has dreamed the universe into existence, and we are all just aspects of its consciousness, perpetually interpreting and reinterpreting itself over and over again. The quote we open this section with is pulled directly from the Upanishads, the sacred texts in the school of philosophy. We are like the spider. We weave our life and move along it. We are like the dreamer who dreams and then lives in the dream. At first, this is really hard to grasp. You may think that this means that we are just meaningless fragments of a consciousness we can't hope to understand, but really the opposite. Everything is essentially God, experiencing itself. The endpoint of this philosophy is a sort of universal kindness and peace to everything, as if we are all the dreamer, why should we seek to hurt ourselves? However, as we discussed in the Zelda section, the nature of dreams is fundamentally to end. However, this is the natural state of things. It would be wrong to try and ensure the dream lasts eternal, just as it's wrong to try and bring someone back from the dead. When Susie seeks to do both of these things, she ends up with a horrific reflection of Gerson conjured by her uncalm mind. She attempts to pervert the natural order and, as a result, receives the resultant karmic punishment. Rousey tries to explain to Susie that the Darkeners are, in effect, just elements of the perception of the Lighteners, and that it is their destiny to ultimately cease, but Susie can't accept this. What seems like a heartfelt moment of friendship is actually Susie colossally missing the point, and we know she's misunderstood this lesson as when Gerson effectively tries to relay the same thing, that the world is much like a novel that can be written anew by every new generation. She fails to see his point and instead wishes for things to last eternally. She wants the dream to carry on infinitely, never waking. But for us to answer the leading question, who is the dreamer, let's reassess what we've learned and see how it will actually apply to the future of Deltarune. With the link between Des and Laura, we have the possibility to try and guess where Des' story might end, based on the archetype set in Twin Peaks. Throughout the third season, we continually see the rot that has begun to plague the town of Twin Peaks in the 25 years since Laura Palmer's murder. Where once the town was full of friendly, somewhat quirky individuals who may have had a dark side but were, at their core, good, the town is now full of nihilistic and self-serving people, many of whom make the original cast, now aged, seem totally out of place. In essence, the person who brought so much light and peace to the town and was capable of redeeming even the worst among them was gone, and it showed. Now, we don't actually think we'll get something like this with Hometown. Des' influence seems a lot more constrained than Laura's, at least based on the information we know. However, we can see the clear effects on those she has impacted. Rudy's illness is worsening, possibly onset or worsened by the loss of his daughter. A weird interaction in church between Rudy and Toriel could even imply that their marriage is on the rocks, although this is definitely up for debate. Without him in the home, Dwell's fear and anxiety is drastically worsened by an overbearing mother. The Dreamers, who were like family to the holidays, have now drifted apart significantly, and Des' disappearance even split their family apart as well. Asgore is seemingly implicated in the disappearance in a way that proved too uncomfortable for both the police department and even his family, and we know he is working obsessively to try and piece together the true events of what had happened. Asriel, the person closest to Des, is nowhere to be found, much like James, Laura's true love, who, after the events of the investigation into her killing, decides to leave Twin Peaks for many years, unable to face the present scars. In Season 3, we see the culmination of many disparate plot threads. Cooper's plan to defeat Bob has another side. He also plans to find Judy, two birds with one stone. In order to do this, he sets the pieces up and, when the moment is right, travels backward in the timeline, implied to not simply be a straight line, but an infinite loop. We'll get to that. And attempts to save Laura, only for her to be whisked away by Judy at the last minute. He does save her, but not in the way that he initially intended. Twin Peaks theorists have been hammering away at what exactly this means for years, and we're certainly not going to be able to solve it here, but we do think that in a meta-narrative sense, it's something of a critique on nostalgia and the obsession with keeping escapism going indefinitely. Cooper initially tries to bring Laura back to her home in Twin Peaks to restore the show's third season, which has been more than a little off, back to the idealistic series fans fell in love with, but this just isn't possible. 25 years have passed. The events that have shaped the town may have been shifted in the past, but a new set of circumstances has transpired. New trials and tribulations have affected the townspeople. You can't just wind back the clock to fix everything. Carol appears to be working with the Knight to restore Des to how she was, but this will never work. She quite literally wants to create an apocalypse to bring her daughter back. How will this fix anything? Even in an idealized situation where the roaring is somehow not the end of days we assume it to be, what would the result be? Rudy would still be at death's door, Carol would still be the bitter woman she has become, Noelle would still have to get over her anxiety imposed at the hands of her mother, Asgore would still be separated from Toriel, and Azrael would still be nowhere to be found. In the same way, the dream can't go on infinitely. Neither can we just return to the same dreams we once had. To quote the philosopher once again, the lighting of the mind has changed. We are different people by the virtue of time, and that is the lesson to take from Laura Palmer. Des is lost. She may well be found, but what will that fix? In the same way that Agent Cooper is the only character with the psycho-spiritual know-how to explain the goings-on in Twin Peaks, both thanks to his own abilities and his past with the mad Wyndham Earl. In a similar vein, in Deltarune right now, there is only a single character with an explicit connection to Gaster, who, if we truly believe he will appear by the end of the game, must be explained by someone who understands him. That would be Sans. As we discussed earlier, we are missing the middle of Sans' story, but somehow we know he ends up in the world of the underground. Based on the archetype laid out by Agent Cooper, then, we can at least put forward the hypothesis that Sans' exile to Snowdin is as a direct result of his meddling in an attempt to save December. While this might at first seem out of character for Sans, the opposite is actually the case. Let's think about Undertale. Sans is, in the narrative, effectively meant to serve as an impartial judge at the end of the game, who relays to us how we've impacted the world. However, should we embark upon the genocide route, his moral compass doesn't allow him to take this stance on impartiality, and even in spite of the fact that he knows that he definitively cannot win, he still chooses to fight us, not just once, but over and over, eternally. This cyclical trial and error is just like what we see with Agent Cooper. In this case, he has to try simply because it's the right thing to do. Even if he knows he can't bring Laura back as she was, he has the opportunity to attempt to do so, and so will do just that. Moreover, when learning that Wyndham Earl is in Twin Peaks, Cooper feels a sense of personal responsibility due to his connection to his former mentor. Perhaps Sans feels the same remorse when it comes to Gaster. If he is one of the "you-two" we hear about in Entry 17, perhaps Sans too was instrumental in creating the world of Deltarune, and now feels he needs to do right by his own sins by confronting Gaster, alongside the heroes of the prophecy. As we move into the future, we fully expect Sans to become relevant to the main plot, because, as with Agent Cooper, he cannot abide by the evil that men, or monsters in this case, do.
So you get an idea, and it is like a seed. And in your mind, the idea is seen and felt. And it explodes like it's got electricity and light connected to it. And it has all the images and the feeling. And it's like in an instant, you know the idea. In an instant. Then the thing is translating that to some medium. It could be a film idea or a painting idea or a furniture idea. It doesn't matter. It wants to be something. It's a seed for something. So the whole thing is translating that idea to a medium.
While the plot of Deltarune grows darker and darker, we are shown continuously that the deepest darkness holds the potential for the brightest light. In this video, we've uttered this phrase repeatedly, but it's simply because it rings so true. As David Lynch said, darkness isn't something to be afraid of when all one needs to do is turn on the light. But remember, darkness is necessary for light to be visible. Too much light and one is blind, effectively darkness again. There must be balance between the two, and this is the warning Ralsei gives with regards to the roaring. This careful balance will be disrupted. Light and dark must always be in equilibrium. Not only do we see the light literally present from our soul, which indeed serves as an arc for carrying that light into the dark world, but we see it in a more metaphorical sense from the Darkeners. Rousey most obviously, but Lancer, Sham, the inhabitants of Castletown. Through our mutual interactions, they allow their inherent positivity, in contrast to the initial negativity in battle, shine through. Indeed, it seems Sham's ultimate goal will be quite literally purifying the darkness from the shadow crystals, leaving us with something of pure light. The shadow crystals themselves have an unmistakable connection to the night, and going by the safe assumption that Des and the night are one and the same, we need to ask the question, will she need purification? In theory, Des, submerged in perfect darkness, should have the potential to shine the most profound light upon the story. That certainly feels like it will be the case, not just illuminating the emotions of the characters upon her return, but literally shining a light on the dark corners of a narrative. Currently, December's fate, even though it may feel like the community has figured her out completely, is still very much the biggest mystery of Deltarune. What's certain, though, is she's ended up in a dark world, somewhere, somehow, and must be set free. We've already pointed out that even if she can be brought back, which is a big if, will she be the same? But here, it's worth considering another question. If to free Des from her fate as the night, we need to shine the most profound inner light possible in order to banish the darkness that has consumed every aspect of her, then what does that mean for the Darkeners? Rousey, Sham, everyone would surely not survive such an occurrence. How would Susie react to that? Is it right for the Dark World to come to such an end? The Darkeners, we have to always remember, only exist within the realms of our perception. Even more specifically, they were animated by the lighting of the mind of whoever created the Dark Fountain. The Dark Worlds are simply dreams, but this doesn't make the Darkeners themselves or their realities any less meaningful. Think of the most profound dream you've ever had, the kind of dream that makes you shoot out of bed and start learning to draw, or play an instrument, or make a game. Are these dreams not meaningful just because they didn't exist within our reality? What about if you never woke up from the dream? You've received this wonderful idea in your sleep, like a fish you've caught, but you can never wake up to put it into practice. You're eternally locked in a comatose state of eternally imagining what you could do with this idea, but you'll never see it through. How terrible would that be? We'll get our answer from Des herself. Through Unused, we can clearly see she is trapped in an eternal dream, unable to speak to anyone, unable to act for herself. A living hell. Susie wants a dark world she can kick back in for all eternity, but we see what that's like for Des. It's not fun and games, it's not exciting, it's just sad. A state between life and death. Sure, whatever horrors she endeavored to escape from that led her here are gone. Perhaps it was uncovering the conspiracy in the town, we can't say for sure, but this alternative isn't preferable to life. If Carol and the Knight are successful in bringing Des back via the Roaring, it wouldn't be her. If all of the light world is subsumed by an endless dark void, the new Des would be just as make-believe as Castletown. We see exactly this when Susie tries to bring back Gerson intentionally via a dark world. It will never work out as they intend, and just as Susie needs to learn that lesson, Carol must surely learn it too. The name of this game is Deltarune, literally a symbol, rune, of change, Delta. To try and keep things lasting in eternal stasis is antithetical to the entire point of the game, this dream that we are all collectively experiencing. Dreams are profound. They have the possibility to change your life in an instant, to impart an idea from somewhere outside of yourself that you never knew that you were capable of. A seed that might just grow into a legendary story. Who would call such a dream unreal? When Gaster speaks of my Deltarune, he is talking about his dream, and Toby's dream. Both are two sides of the same coin, but as the Windfish said, it is the nature of all dreams to end. Because the dream ends, it has meaning. A deep, earth-shaking meaning that stretches far beyond the bounds of your own mind, and further still than a dream in your head ever could on its own. Because the dream ends, the beautiful work of art is allowed to be born into this world and take its shape. A long time ago now, on a night like the one you might be watching this video on, a certain man had a dream. He didn't understand at the time that this dream would not only change the trajectory of his life, but millions of others. In the dream, all he saw was an ending, and a symbol. And then he woke up, and because of that dream ending, we have Deltarune.
There's a line in Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, we live inside a dream.
We live inside a dream.
Yeah, that's a very Lynchian.
No, but it's sort of the truth. And one day we wake up and realize that it was a dream, and we realize who we truly are. It's a glorious day when that happens.